What happens when a royal guest thinks he can waltz into a late-night talk show and lecture the host about American politics? In just 24 seconds, one entitled comment would trigger the most explosive on-air meltdown in television history. Bill Maher had seen it all during his decades hosting Real-Time. Politicians, celebrities, activists, they all came through those studio doors thinking they could handle his sharp wit and fearless questioning. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this particular Friday night taping. The show had started normally enough. Bill walked out to his usual thunderous applause, cracking jokes about the week's political chaos. The audience was hot, laughing at every punchline as he delivered his opening monologue with that trademark smirk. Everything felt routine, predictable even. Then came the guest introduction that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prince Harry. The studio erupted as the Duke of Sussex strode onto the stage, waving to the crowd with that practiced royal wave. He looked comfortable, confident even, settling into the guest chair with an air of casual authority that immediately caught Bill's attention. "So Harry," Bill began, leaning back in his chair with that familiar mischievous grin, "you've been living in America for a few years now. What do you think of our little democracy experiment?" It seemed like such an innocent question, a softball to get the conversation rolling. But Harry's response would prove to be the first crack in what was about to become a complete disaster. "Well, Bill, I think Americans could learn a lot from how we handle things in Britain. Your system here is quite frankly rather chaotic and undignified." The audience fell silent. You could hear a pin drop in that studio. Bill's eyebrows shot up, his smile faltering for just a moment before returning. Sharper this time. "Chaotic and undignified?" Bill repeated slowly, his voice carrying just a hint of edge. "That's interesting coming from someone whose family has been embroiled in scandal after scandal for the past few years." Harry shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting pushback so quickly. "That's completely different, Bill. We're talking about governance here, not tabloid gossip." "Oh, so when your family's drama plays out on the world stage, that's just tabloid gossip, but when American democracy gets messy, that's undignified? Help me understand the logic there, Your Highness." The tension in the room was palpable now. The audience sensed something was brewing, their heads turning back and forth between host and guest like they were watching a tennis match. But this wasn't a game. This was about to become a bloodbath. Harry's jaw tightened visibly. "I think you're misunderstanding my point, Bill. I'm simply suggesting that perhaps Americans could benefit from a more structured, traditional approach to leadership." "Traditional approach?" Bill's voice rose slightly. "You mean like having someone's job handed to them because of who their daddy is?" "Yeah, we tried that. We called it a revolution and kicked your ancestors out about 250 years ago." The audience erupted in applause and cheers. They could sense their host was just getting warmed up, and Harry was walking into a trap he didn't even see coming. "That's a rather simplistic view of history, don't you think?" Harry shot back, his composure starting to crack. "The monarchy provides stability and continuity that your system lacks." Bill leaned forward now, his eyes glinting with the kind of predatory focus that had destroyed countless political careers. "Stability? Let's talk about stability, Harry. Your brother and sister-in-law can't even go to a basketball game without your family's drama making headlines. Your father's been waiting 70 years for a job promotion. And you threw your entire family under the bus on international television and then moved to Montecito to complain about how hard it is to be rich and famous? That's your idea of stability?" Harry's face was turning red now, his royal composure completely abandoned. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Bill. You don't understand the pressures, the expectations, the sacrifices we make." "Sacrifices?" Bill's voice dripped with incredulity. "You live in a mansion, you've never had a real job, and your biggest hardship is deciding which private jet to take to your next climate change lecture. Meanwhile, actual Americans are working 3 jobs just to pay rent. But please, tell us more about your sacrifices." The studio audience was eating this up. They could sense their host had found his target, and he wasn't letting go. Harry, meanwhile, was spiraling, his carefully crafted public persona crumbling in real time. "This is exactly the kind of small-minded thinking that holds America back," Harry snapped, pointing his finger at Bill. "You can't see beyond your own narrow perspective." That finger point was the moment everything changed. Bill Maher had been called many things over the years, but small-minded wasn't one of them. And he wasn't about to let some privileged royal lecture him about perspective. "Small-minded?" Bill's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Harry, I've been doing this show for over 2 decades. I've interviewed presidents, prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners. I've challenged every form of authority you can imagine. And you, someone who's never earned anything in your life, who ran away from the only job he's ever had, wants to lecture me about perspective? The silence that followed was deafening. Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly unprepared for such a direct assault on his character. The studio audience held their breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "I never ran away from anything," Harry finally managed, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I made a choice to protect my family from a toxic environment." Bill laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Protect your family? You mean the family you left behind to deal with the mess while you signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify? That kind of protection? You don't know what my wife went through." Harry's voice cracked with emotion. "The racism, the harassment, the complete lack of support from the institution. Oh, here we go." Bill rolled his eyes dramatically. "The victim card. Harry, your wife knew exactly what she was signing up for when she married into the royal family. She's not some naive girl from Kansas. She was a working actress who understood publicity better than most people in this room." Harry shot up from his chair, his face now crimson with rage. "How dare you speak about my wife that way? You have no right." "Sit down, Harry," Bill commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is my show, not your palace. You don't get to stand up and intimidate people here." For a moment, it looked like Harry might actually leave. He stood there, trembling with fury, his hands clenched into fists. The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Slowly, reluctantly, Harry sat back down, but his posture remained rigid, defiant. "Look," Bill continued, his voice slightly softer but no less cutting, "I actually feel bad for you, Harry. I really do. You were born into a life you never chose, and that's not your fault. But at some point, you have to take responsibility for your own choices. And your choice has been to burn every bridge, betray every confidence, and then complain when people don't trust you anymore." "I told my truth," Harry replied through gritted teeth. "Something Americans are supposed to value." "Your truth?" Bill's eyebrows shot up again. "Harry, there's truth, and then there's your truth. And your truth seems to change depending on which streaming service is writing the check." The audience gasped. That was a direct hit, and everyone knew it. Harry's lucrative media deals had been a source of controversy since he left royal duties, and Bill had just weaponized that criticism with surgical precision. "That's completely unfair," Harry protested, his voice rising. "We needed to support ourselves after being cut off financially." "Cut off?" Bill leaned forward incredulously. "Harry, you inherited millions from your mother. You lived rent-free in palaces your entire adult life. Most Americans would kill for your definition of being cut off." "It's not about the money," Harry insisted, but his argument was falling flat. "Of course it's about the money," Bill shot back. "Everything you've done since leaving has been about monetizing your royal connection while simultaneously complaining about how terrible being royal was. You can't have it both ways." Harry was visibly struggling now, his carefully rehearsed talking points crumbling under Bill's relentless logic. "You're twisting everything I'm saying." "I'm not twisting anything. I'm just pointing out the contradictions in your story. You want sympathy for leaving the royal family, but you also want to cash in on being royal. You want privacy, but you do tell all interviews. You want to be seen as a regular guy, but you throw around your title whenever it's convenient." "That's not true," Harry said weakly, but even he seemed to know how hollow it sounded. Bill sensed victory and pressed his advantage. "Harry, let me ask you something. If being royal was so terrible, why don't you just give up the title? Become Harry Wales, private citizen, make your own way in the world without trading on your grandmother's legacy." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harry's face went through several expressions as he processed what Bill had just asked. It was the one question he clearly hadn't prepared for, the one that cut right to the heart of his contradictions. "It's not that simple," Harry finally replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sure it is," Bill pressed. "People change their names all the time. You could be Harry Mountbatten Windsor, regular guy, tomorrow if you wanted. But you won't, will you? Because then you'd just be another privileged white guy with daddy issues, and that's not nearly as marketable." Harry's composure finally snapped completely. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You sit here in your bubble making jokes about things you don't understand." "My bubble?" Bill's voice rose to match Harry's. "I grew up in New Jersey. My father sold insurance. I worked for everything I have. You want to talk about bubbles? You lived in a literal palace." The audience was completely transfixed now. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a full-scale meltdown happening in real time on national television. "At least I'm trying to make a difference," Harry shouted back. At least I'm using my platform for good causes. Good causes? Bill laughed harshly. Harry, you lecture people about climate change while taking private jets. You talk about mental health while publicly destroying your family relationships. You preach about service while abandoning the one form of actual service you were born to do. That last comment hit Harry like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage as he processed what Bill had just said about abandoning service. For a moment, it looked like he might actually lunge across the desk. How dare you question my service? Harry screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. I served in Afghanistan. I put my life on the line for my country, and I respect that, Bill replied calmly, which somehow made his next words even more devastating. But that was 20 years ago, Harry. What have you done lately besides complain and cash checks? The studio audience was completely silent now, shocked by the raw emotion and venom flying between host and guest. This had gone far beyond typical talk show banter. This was personal, brutal, and utterly compelling. Harry stood up again, this time staying on his feet despite Bill's earlier command. You know what? This is exactly why I left. This toxic attitude, this complete lack of respect. Americans like you think you can say anything to anyone without consequences. Consequences? Bill's voice turned ice cold. Is that a threat, Your Highness? Are you going to have me thrown in the Tower of London? Don't mock me, Harry snarled. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The audience gasped audibly. That sounded dangerously close to a threat, and everyone in the room felt it. Bill, however, seemed energized by it. Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Bill said, rising from his own chair to face Harry directly. I'm dealing with an entitled brat who's never been told no in his entire life. Someone who thinks his bloodline makes him special, who runs away when things get tough, and who expects everyone else to clean up his messes. That's enough, Harry shouted, his face now purple with rage. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. You're absolutely right, Bill agreed with a cold smile. You don't. There's the door. Use it. For a moment, Harry seemed stunned. Nobody had ever dismissed him so bluntly, so publicly. He looked around the studio as if searching for support, but found only hundreds of faces staring back at him in fascination and judgment. You can't kick me off your show, Harry said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. Watch me, Bill replied flatly. This is America, Harry. We don't bow to royalty here. We threw that tea in the harbor for a reason. Harry's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find words. His entire worldview seemed to be crumbling in real time. He was a prince, a duke, someone people were supposed to respect and defer to. But here he was, being publicly humiliated by a comedian from New Jersey. Security, Bill called out calmly, never taking his eyes off Harry. Please escort His Royal Highness to the exit. 2 large security guards appeared from the wings, moving purposefully toward Harry. The prince looked back and forth between them and Bill, his face cycling through emotions so quickly it was almost cartoonish. This is outrageous, Harry sputtered as the security guards flanked him. You can't treat me like this. Do you know who I am? Yeah, Bill replied with devastating simplicity. You're someone who used to be important. That final insult seemed to break something inside Harry. He began shouting incoherently as the security guards gently but firmly began escorting him toward the exit. You'll regret this. You have no idea what you've done. I have friends in high places. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Bill watched calmly as Harry was led away, then turned back to his audience with a slight shrug. Well, that was interesting. Anyone else think we dodged a bullet on the whole monarchy thing? The audience exploded in laughter and applause, clearly relieved that the tension had finally broken. But their host wasn't done yet. You know what the sad thing is? Bill continued, settling back into his chair as if nothing had happened. Harry actually had a chance to reinvent himself. He could have come to America, kept his head down, done some genuine charity work, and eventually people would have forgotten about all the drama. Instead, he chose to make himself into a professional victim. The audience nodded along, hanging on every word. They could sense their host was building to something important, and that's the real tragedy here. Bill went on. Not that a privileged prince had his feelings hurt, but that he had every advantage in life and chose to waste them. He had a platform most people could only dream of, and he used it to settle personal scores instead of actually making the world better. From somewhere off stage, they could still hear Harry's voice, though the words were no longer clear. The security team was clearly having some difficulty getting him to leave quietly. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill announced to his audience, I think we just witnessed the exact moment when someone realizes that royal titles don't mean anything if you don't have royal character to back them up. The applause was thunderous now, a mixture of appreciation for their host's wit and relief that the uncomfortable confrontation was finally over. Bill basked in it for a moment before raising his hand for quiet. "When we come back," he said with his trademark grin, "we'll talk to someone who actually earned their success the hard way. My next guest is a small business owner from Detroit who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. Now that's what I call American royalty." As the show cut to commercial, the audience was still buzzing with excitement. They had just witnessed television history, a complete meltdown that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. And through it all, Bill Maher had remained calm, clever, and completely in control.